Chapter 9 Grim Defeat. Professor Dumbledore sent all the Gryffindors back to the Great Hall, where they were joined 10 minutes later by the students from Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, who all looked extremely confused. The teachers and I need to conduct a thorough search of Castle, Professor Dumbledore told them as Professor McGonagall and Flitwick closed all doors into the hall. I am afraid that for your own safety you will have to spend the night here. I want the prefect to stand guard over the entrance to the hall, and I am leaving the head boy and girl in charge. Any disturbance should be reported to be immediately. He added to Percy, who was looking immensely proud and important. Send word with one of the ghosts. Professor Dumbledore paused, about to leave the hall, and said, "Oh yes, you'll be needing the casual wave of this wand," and the long tables flew to the edges of the hall and stood themselves against the wall. Another wave, and the floor was covered with hundreds of squashy purple sleeping bags. "Sleep well," said Professor Dumbledore, closing the door behind him. The hall immediately began to buzz excitedly. Gryffindors were telling the rest of the school what had just happened. Everyone into their sleeping bags shouted, "Percy, come on now. No more talking. Light out in 10 minutes. Come on," Ron said to Harry and Hermione. They seized 3 sleeping bags and dragged them into a corner. "Do you think Black's still in the castle?" Hermione whispered anxiously. "Dumbledore obviously thinks he might be," said Ron. "It's very lucky he picked tonight, you know," said Hermione as they climbed fully dressed into their sleeping bags and propped themselves on their elbow to talk. "The one night we weren't in the tower, I reckon he's lost track of time being on the run," said Ron. "Didn't realize it was Halloween, otherwise he had have come bursting in here." Hermione suddenly all around them, people were asking one another the same question. "How did he get in? Maybe he knows how to apparate," said a Ravenclaw a few feet away, "just appear out of thin air, you know." "Discuss himself, probably," said a Hufflepuff fifth year. "He wouldn't have flown in," suggested Dean Thomas. "Honestly, am I the only person who ever bothered to read Hogwarts or history?" said Harmony crossly to Harry and Ron. "Probably," said Ron. "Why? Because the castle's protected by more than walls, you know," said Harmony. "There are all sort of enchantments on it to stop people entering by stealth. You can just apparate in here, and I had liked to see the disguise that could fool those dementors. They are guarding every single entrance to the grounds. They had have been seen him fly into, and Fleech knows all the secret passages. They'll have them covered." "The lights are going out now," Percy shouted. "I want everyone in their sleeping bags and no more talking." The castle all went out at once. The only light now came from the silvery ghosts, who were deflating about, talking severely to the perfects, and the enchantment ceiling, which, like the sky outside, was scattered with stars. With that, and the whispering that still filled the hall, Harry felt as though he were sleeping outdoors in a light wind. Once every hour, a teacher would reappear in the hall to check that everything was quiet around 3 in the morning. When many students had finally fallen asleep, Professor Dumbledore came in. Harry watched him, looking around for Percy, who had been prowling between the sleeping bags, telling people off for talking. Percy was only a short way away from Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who quickly pretended to be asleep as Dumbledore's footsteps drew nearer. "Any sign of him, Professor?" asked Percy in a whisper. "No, all well here. Everything under control, sir." "Good. There is no point moving them all now. I have found a temporary guardian for the Gryffindor portrait hole. You'll be able to move them back in tomorrow." "And the fat lady, sir?" "Hiding in a map of Agri, sir, on the second floor. Apparently she refused to let back in without the password, so he attacked. She is still very distressed, but once she is calmed down, I'll have Mr. Fleece restore her." Harry heard the door of the hall cracked open again, and more footsteps. Headmaster, it was Snape. Harry kept quite still, listening hard. The whole of the third floor has been searched. He is not there, and Flitch has done the Dagons. Nothing there either. What about the astronomy tower, Professor Trelawney's room, the owlery? All searched very well, Severus. I didn't really expect Black to linger. Have you any theory as to how to get in, Professor? Asked Nip. Harry raised his head very slightly off his arm. Tooth free is other year. Many Severus, each of them are unlike as the next. Harry opened his eyes a fraction and squinted up to where they stood. Dumbledore's back was to him, but he couldn't see Percy's face, rapt with attention, and Snape's profile, which looked angry. You remember the conversation we had, Headmaster, just before the start of term, said Snape, who was barely open his lips as though trying to block Percy out of conversation. I do, Severus, said Dumbledore, and there was something like warning in his voice. It seemed almost impossible that Black could have entered the school without inside help. I did express my concern when you appointed. I do not believe a single person inside the castle would have helped Black enter it, said Dumbledore, and his tone made it so clear that the subject was closed, and Snape didn't reply. I must go down to the dormitory, said Dumbledore. I said I would inform them when our search has complete. Didn't they want to help, sir? Said Percy. Oh yes, said Dumbledore coldly, but I am afraid no Dementor will close the threshold of this castle while I am headmaster. Percy looked slightly upshade. Dumbledore left the hall walking quietly and quietly. Snape stood for a moment watching the headmaster with an expression of deep resentment on his face. Then he too left. Harry glanced sideways at Ron and Hermione, but both of them had their eyes open too, reflecting the starry ceiling. What was all that about? Ron mouted. The school talked of nothing but Sirius Black for the next few days. The theories about how he had entered the castle become wilder and wilder, and Han about Hufflepuff spent much of their next herbology class telling anyone who had listened that Black could turn into a flowering shrub. The fat lady's ripped canvas had been taken off the wall and replaced with the portrait of Sir Cadogan and his fat grey pony. Nobody has very happy about this. Sir Cadogan spent half of his time challenging people to duel, and the rest thing a ridiculously complicated password, which he changed at last twice a day. He is a complete lunatic, said Seamus Finnegan angrily to Percy. Can't we get anyone else? None of them other pictures want to job, said Percy, frightened of what happened to the fat lady. Sir Cadogan was the only one brave enough to volunteer. Sir Cadogan, however, was the least of Harry's worries. He was now being closely watched. Teachers found excuse to walk along corridor with him, and Percy Weasley, acting Harry suspected on his mother's order, was telling him everywhere like an extremely pompous guard dog. To cap it all, Professor McGonagall summoned Harry into her office with such a somber expression on her face. Harry thought someone must have died. There is no point hiding it from you any longer, Potter, she said in a very serious voice. I know this will come as a shock to you, but Cyrus Black, I know he is after me, said Harry wearingly. I heard Ron's dad telling his mum, Mr. Weasley worked for the Ministry of Magic. Professor McGonagall seemed very taken aback. She stared at Harry for a moment or two. Then she said, I see well. In that case, Potter, you'll understand why I don't think it's a good idea for you to be practicing Quidditch in the evening out on the field with only your team members. It's very exposed, Potter. We have got other first match on Saturday, said Harry, outraged. I have got trained Professor. Professor McGonagall considered him intently. Harry knew she was deeply interested in the Gryffindor's team prospect. It had been she, after all, who had suggested him as a seeker in first place. He waited, holding his breath. Professor McGonagall, stood up and stared out of the window at Whitfield, just visible through the rain. Well, goddessness, no, I had liked to see us win the cup at last, but all the same, Porter, I had be happier if a teacher were present. I'll ask Madam Woods to oversee your training session. The weather worsened steadily as the first quiz match drew nearer. A touted Gryffindor team was training harder than ever under the eyes of Adam Hooch. Then, at their final training session before Saturday's match, Oliver Wood gave his team some unwelcome news. We are not playing Slytherin, he told, looking very angry. Flint just been to say me we are playing Hufflepuff instead. Why? Chores the rest of the team. Flint's excuse is that their seeker Sam still injured, said Wood, grinding his teeth furiously, but it's obvious why they are doing it. Don't want to play in the weather. Think it will damage their chance. There had been strong wind and heavy rain all day, and as Wood spoke, they heard a distant rumble of thunder. There is nothing wrong with Malfoy arm, said Harry furiously. He is taking it. I know that, but we can't prove it, said Wood bitterly, and we have been practicing all those moves assuming we are playing Slytherins, and instead it's Hufflepuff and their style is quite different. They have got new captain and seeker Patrick Tigro. Angelina, Alyssa and Catley suddenly giggle. What? Said Wood, frowning at this light-hearted behavior. He is that tall, good-looking one, isn't he? Said Angelina. Strong and silent, said Cathy, and they started to giggle again. He is only silent because he is too thick to string two words together, said Fred impatiently. I don't know why you are worried. Oliver Hufflepuff is a pushover. Last time we played them, Harry caught the snitch in about 5 minutes. Remember? We were playing in complete different conditions. Wood shouted, his eyes bulging slightly. Bagris put a very strong side together. He is an excellent seeker. I was afraid you had take it like this. We must relax. We must keep our focus. Slytherin is trying to wrong foot. Us must win. Oliver, calm down, said Fred, looking slightly alarmed. You are taking Hufflepuff very seriously. The day before the match, the wind reached howling point and the rain fell harder than ever. It was so dark inside the corridor and classroom that extra torches and lanterns were lit. The Slytherin team was looking very smug instead, and none more so than Malfoy. If only my arm was feeling a bit better, he sighed as the gale outside pounded the window. Harry had no room in his head to worry about anything except the match tomorrow. Oliver Wood kept hurrying by to him between classes and giving him lips. The third time this happens would talk for so long that Harry suddenly realized he was 10 minutes late for Defense Against the Dark Art and set off at the run with Wood shouting after him. Digros got very fast saver. Harry, so you might want to try looping him. Harry skidded to a halt outside the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, pulled the door open and dashed inside. Sorry I'm late, Professor Lupin. But it wasn't Professor Lupin who looked up at him from the teacher's desk. It was Snape. This lesson began 10 minutes ago, Potter, so I think we'll make it 10 points from the Gryffindor. Sit down. But Harry didn't move. Where is Professor Lupin? He said. He says he is feeling too ill to teach today, said Snape with a twisted smile. I believe I told you to sit down, but Harry stared where he was. What's wrong with him? Snape's back eyes glittered. Nothing life-threatening, he said, looking as tough he wished it were. 5 more points from Gryffindor, and if I vow to ask you to sit down again, it will be 50. Harry walked slowly to his seat and sat down. Snape looked around at the class. As I was saying before, Potter interrupted. Professor Lupin was not left any record of the topics you have covered so far. Yes, sir. We have done Bogarts, Red Caps, Capaz and Gridloy, said Harmony quickly, and we are just about to start. Quite, said Snap coldly. I did not ask you for information. I was merely commenting on Professor Lupin's lack of organization. Is Best defense against the dark art teacher we have ever had, said Dean Thomas boldly, and there was a murmur of agreement from the rest of the class. Snape looked more menacing than ever. You are easily satisfied. Lupin is hardly overtaxing you. I would expect first year to be able to deal with red caps and green yellows. Today we shall discuss. Harry watched him flick through the textbook to very back chapter which he must know they hadn't covered. Werewolves, said Snap. But sir, said Hermione, seemingly unable to restrain herself, we are not supposed to do werewolves yet. We are due to start. Inky punks, Miss Granger, said Snape in a voice of deadly calm. I was under the impression that I am teaching this lesson, not you, and I am telling you all to turn to page 394. He glanced around again. A lot of you now. With many bitter sidelong look and some sullen muttering, the class opened their books. Which of you can tell me how we discuss between the werewolves and the true wolves? Said Snape. Everyone sat in motionless silence, everyone except Hermione, whose hand, as it was often did, had shot straight into the air. Anyone? Snape said, ignoring Hermione. His twisted smile was back. Are you telling me that Professor Lupin hasn't even taught you the basic distance between? We told you, said Parvati suddenly. We haven't got as far as werewolves yet. We are still on silent snake sniff. Well, I never thought I had meet a third year class who wouldn't even recognize a werewolf when they saw one. I shall make a point of informing Professor Dumbledore how very behind you all are. Please, sir, said Hermione, whose hand was still in the air. The werewolves differ from the true wolves in several small ways. The snot of the werewolf. That is the second time you have spoken out of the turn, Miss Granger, said Snap coolly. 5 more points from the Gryffindor for being an insufferable know-it-all. Hermione went very red, put down her hand, and stared at the floor with her eyes full of tears. It was a mark of how much the class loathed Snape that they were all glaring at him because every one of them had called Hermione a non-it-all the last once, and Ron, who told Hermione she was a non-it-all at last twice a week, said loudly, you ask us a question and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told? The class knew instantly he had gone too far. Snape advanced on Ron slowly, and the room held its breath. Detention, Weasley, Snape said quietly, his face very close to Ron's, and if I ever heard you criticize the way I teach the class again, you will be very sorry indeed. No one made a sound throughout the rest of the lesson. They sat and made note on werewolves from the textbook while Snape rolled up and down the rows of desks, examining the work they had been doing with Professor Lupin. Very poorly explained. That is incorrect. The kappa is more commonly found in Mongolia, said Lupin. Gave this 8 out of 10. I wouldn't have given it 3 when the bell rang at last. Snape held them back. You will reach each write an essay to be handed in to me. On the way, you recognize and kill werewolves. I want to roll the parchment on the subject, and I want them by Monday morning. It is time somebody took this class in hand. Wesley, stay behind. We need to arrange your detention. Harry and Hermione left the class with the rest of the class, who waited until they were well out of earshot, then burst into a furious tirade about Snape. Snape's never been like with any of our other defense against the dark art teacher, even if he didn't want the job. Harry said to be Hermione why he got it in for Lupin. Do you think this is all because of Bogart? I don't know, said Hermione pensively, but I really hope Professor Lupin get better soon. Ron caught up with them 5 minutes later in towering ray. Do you know what that? He called Snape something that made Hermione say, Ron is making me do. I have got to scrub out the bedpans in the hospital wing without magic. He was breathing deeply, his fist clenched. Why? Couldn't back have hidden in the Snape's office. Could have finished him off for us. Harry woke extremely early the next morning, so early that it was still dark for a moment. He thought the roaring of the wind and woken him. Then he felt a cold breeze on the back of his neck and sat bolt upright. Pius the portcullis had been floating next to him, blowing hard in his ear. "What did you do that for?" said Harry furiously. Pius puffed out of his cheek, flew hard, and zoomed backward out of the room, cackling. Harry fumbled for his alarm clock and looked at it. It was 4:30. Cursing Pius, he rolled over and tried to get back to sleep, but it was very difficult now that he was awake to ignore the sound of the thunder rumbling overhead, the pounding of the wind against the castle wall, and the distant cracking of the trees in the forbidden forest. In a few hours, he would be out on a quick field battling through that gale. Finally, he gave up any thought of more sleep, got up, dressed, picked up his Nimbus 2000, and walked quietly out of the dormitory. As Harry opened the door, something brushed against his leg. He bent down just in time to grab Crookshank by the end of his bushy tail and drag him outside. "You know, I reckon Ron was right about you," Harry told Crookshank suspiciously. "There are plenty of mice around this place. Go and chase them. Go on," he added snugglingly. Crookshank down the spiral staircase with his foot. Leave Scabber alone. The noise of the storm was even louder in the common room. Harry knew better than to think the match would be called, which match weren't called off for trifle like thunderstorm. Nevertheless, he was starting to feel very apprehensive. Wood had pointed out Cedric Diggory to him in the corridor. Diggory was fifth year and lot bigger than Harry. Seekers were usually light and speedy, but Digger's weight would be an advantage in this weather because he was likely to be blown off course. Harry whirled away the course until down in front of the fire, getting up every now and then to stop Crookshank from sneaking up the boys' staircase again. At long last, Harry thought it must be time for breakfast, so he headed through the portrait hole along "Stand and Fight, You Had Maggie Curl," yelled Sir Cadogan. "Oh, shut up," Harry yawned. He reviewed a bit a large bowl of porridge, and by the time he had started on toast, the rest of the team had turned up. "It's going to be a tough one," said Wood, who wasn't eating anything. "Stop worrying, Oliver," said Alicia soothingly. "We don't mind a bit of rain," but it was considerably more than a bit of rain. Such was the popularity of Quidditch that the whole school turned out to watch the match as usual, but they ran down the lawns toward the Quidditch field, heads bowed against the ferocious wind, umbrella being whipped out of their hands as they went. Just before he entered the locker room, Harry saw Malfoy, Grab, and Goyle laughing and pointing at him from under enormous umbrella of their way to stadium. The team changed into their scattered robes and waited for Wood's usual pre-match pep talk about it didn't come. He tried to speak several times, made an odd glumping noise, then shook his head hopelessly and beckoned them to follow him. The wind was so strong that they staggered sideways as they walked out into the field. If the crowd was cheering, they couldn't hear it over. The fresh roll of thundering rain was splattering over Harry's glasses. How on earth was he going to see the snitch in this? The Hufflepuff were approaching from the opposite side of the field wearing canary yellow robes. The captain walked up to each other and shook hands. Diggory smiled at Wood, but Wood now looked as if he had a lockjaw and merely nodded. Harry saw Madam Hooch mouth from a wood. "Mount your brooms." He pulled his right foot out of the mud with Squelch and swung it over his Nimbus 2000. Madam Hooch put her whistle to her lips and gave it a blast that sounding thrill and distance. They were off. Harry rose fist, but his nimbus was shivering slightly with the wind. He held it as steady as he could and turned, squinting things the rain. Within 5 minutes, Harry was soaked with his skin and frozen, hardly able to see his teammate, let alone the tiny snitch. He flew backward and forward across the field past blood, red and yellow snip with no idea of what was happening in the rest of the game. He couldn't hear the commentary over the wind. The crowd was hiding beneath a sea of cloaks and battered umbrellas. Twice Harry came very close to being unsettled by blizzard. His vision was so clouded by the rain on his glasses he hadn't seen them coming. He lost track on time. It was getting harder and harder to hold his broom straight. The sky was getting darker as though they might had decided to come early. Twice Harry nearly hit another player without knowing whether it was a teammate or opponent. Everyone was now so wet and the rain so thick he could hardly let them apart. With the first flash of lightning came the sound of Madame Hooch's whistle. Harry could just see the outline of Wood through the thick rain, gesturing him to the ground. The whole team splashed down into the mud. I called for timeout. Wood roared at his team, "Come on, under here." They huddled at that edge of field under a large umbrella. Harry took off his glasses and wiped them, hurried on his ropes. "What's the score?" "We are 50 points up," said Wooch. "But unless we get the sneeze soon, we'll be playing into the night. I have got no chance with this on," Harry said exasperatedly, waving his glasses. At that very moment, Hermione appeared at his shoulder. She was holding her cloak over her head and was inexplicable beaming. "I have heard an idea, Harry. Give me your glasses quickly." He handed them to her, and as the team watched in amazement, Hermione tapped her wand and said, "Imperious." "There," she said, handing them back to Harry. "They'll repel water." Would look as though he couldn't have kissed her. "Brilliant," he called hoarsely after her as she disappeared into the crowd. "Okay, team, let's go for it." Hermione's spell had done the trick. Harry was still numb with cold, still weathered than I had ever been in his life, but he could see. Full of fresh determination, he urged his broom through the turbulent air, steering in very direction for the snitch, avoiding a bludger, ducking beneath Diggory, who was tackling in the opposite direction. There was another clap of thunder, followed immediately by forked lightning. This was getting more and more dangerous. Harry needed to get the snitch quickly. He turned intently to head back toward the middle of the field, but at that moment another flash of light illuminated the stands and Harry saw something that distracted him completely: the silhouette of an enormous shaggy black dog, clearly imprinted against the sky, motionless in the topmost empty row of seats. Harry's numb hand slipped on the broom handle and the nimbus dropped a few feet, shaking his shoulder dang out of his eyes. He squinted back into the stand. The dog had vanished. "Harry came!" Wood's anguished yell from the Gryffindor's goalpost. "Harry, behind you!" Harry looked widely around. Gedrick Doggy was planting up the field, and tiny streak of gold was smearing in rain-filled air between them. With a jolt of panic, Harry threw himself flat to a broom handle and zoomed toward the snitch. "Come on!" He growled at his nimbus, and the rain whipped his face faster. But something was happening. An eerie silence was falling across the stadium. The wind, though as strong as ever, was thwarting the roar. It was as tough someone had turned off the sound, as though Harry had gone suddenly deaf. What was going on? And then a horrified, familiar wave of cold swept over him, inside him, just as he became unaware of something moving on the field below. Before he had had time to think, Harry had taken his eyes off the snitch and looked down. At last, 100 Dementors Their hiding face pointing up at him were standing beneath him. It was as tough freezing water were rising in his chest, cutting at his inside, and then he heard it again. Someone was screaming, screaming inside his head. A woman, not Harry, not Harry, please not Harry, stand aside, you are silly girl, stand aside now. Not Harry, please not take me, kill me instead. Numbing swirl white mist was filling Harry's brain. What was he doing? Why was he flying? He needed to help her. She was going to die. She was going to be murdered. He was falling, falling through an icy mist. Not Harry, please, not mercy, have mercy. A still voice was laughing. The woman was screaming, and Harry knew no more. Lucky the ground was so soft. I thought he was dead for sure, but he didn't even break his glasses. Harry couldn't hear the voice whispering, but they made no sense whatsoever. He didn't have clue where he was or how he had got there or what he had been going before he got there. All he knew was that every inch of him was etching as though it had been beneath. That was the scariest thing I have ever seen in my life. Scariest, the scariest thing. Hooded black figure, cold, screaming. Harry's eyes snapped open. He was lying in the hospital wing. The Gryffindor Quidditch team, spattered with mud from head to foot, was gathered around his bed. Ron and Hermione were also there, looking as though they had just climbed out of swimming pool. Harry said, Fred, who looked extremely white underneath the mud, how are you feeling? It was as though Harry's memory was on fast forward. The lightning, the gleam, the snitch, and the dementors. What happened? He said, sitting up so suddenly they all gasped. You fell off, said Fred. Must have been what, 50 feet? Thought you had died, said Alice, who was shaking. Hermione made a small squeaky noise. Her eyes were extremely bloodshot. But the match, said Harry. What happened? Are we doing a replay? No one said anything. The horrible truth sank into Harry's like a stone. We didn't lose. Gregory got the stitch, said George, just after you fell. He didn't realize what had happened when he looked back and saw you on the ground. He tried to call it off, wanted to rematch, but they won fair and square. Even Wood admits it. There is Wood, said Harry, suddenly realizing he wasn't there. Still in the shower, said Fred. We think he is trying to drown himself. Harry put his face to his knees, his hand gripping his hair. Fred grabbed his shoulder and shook it roughly. Come on, Harry, you have never missed the snitch before. There had to be one time you didn't get it, said George. It's not over yet, said Fred. We lost by 100 points, right? So, if Hufflepuff lost to Ravenclaw and we beat Ravenclaw and Slytherin, Hufflepuff will have to lose by at least 200 points, said George. But if they beat Ravenclaw, no way Ravenclaw is too good. But if Slytherin lost against Hufflepuff, it all depends on the point, a margin of the 100 either way. Harry lied there, not saying a word. They had lost for the first time ever. He had lost a pitch match. After 10 minutes or so, Madame Pomfrey came over to tell the team to leave him in peace. Well, come and see you later, Fred told him. Don't beat yourself up, Harry. You are still the best keeper we have ever had. The team dropped out, trailing mud behind them. Madame Pomfrey shut the door behind them, looking disapproving. Ron and Hermione moved nearly to Harry's bed. Dumbledore was really angry, Hermione said in a quaky voice. I have never seen him like that before. He ran out to the field as you fell, waved his wand, and you sort of slowed down before you hit the ground. Then he whirled his wand at the Dementor, shot silver stuff at them. They left the stadium right away. He was furious. They had come out the ground. We heard them. Then he magicked you onto a stretcher, said Ron, and walked up to school with you floating on it. Everyone thought you were. His voice faded, but Harry hardly noticed he was thinking about what the Dementors was done to him. Without the screaming voice, he looked up and saw Ron and Hermione looking at him so anxiously that he quickly cast around for something matter to of fact to say. Did someone get my nimbus? Ron and Hermione looked quietly at each other. What? Said Harry, looking for one of the other. Well, when you fell off, it got blown away, said Hermione instantly, and it hit, it hit, oh, Harry, it hit the whomping willow. Harry's inside lurched. The whomping willow was a very violent tree that stood along in the middle of the ground, and he said, dreading the answer, well, you know, the whopping willow, said Ron. It doesn't like being hit. Professor Flitwick brought it back just before you came around, said Harmony in a very small voice. Slowly, she reached down for a bag, and her feet turned into upside down and a dozen bits of splintered wood and twine onto the bed, the only remains of Harry's faithful, finally beaten broomstick. That's it for today. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next chapter. Till then, see ya. Bye bye.